إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم شر الأمور محدثاتها فإن كل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. To proceed, our talk this evening, insha'Allah ta'ala, will be about a specific topic in fiqh, in the general subject of salat, specifically the subject of the imamah, the subject of the leading of the salat, or the salat in congregation and its imamat, or the leading of that salat, and specifically who is most rightful to lead the salat, who has the most right to lead the prayer, the congregational prayer. Now this hadith this talk this evening, it's going to be based around one very explicit hadith, one very direct hadith that deals very directly with the meaning of this topic. That is the hadith that's collected by Imam Muslim in his Sahih, on the authority of Ismail ibn Raja, who narrates from Aus ibn Dam'aj, and I've truncated the chain. The hadith is collected by other than Imam Muslim. I could mention to you almost 100 sources for the hadith. However, we'll stick with the basic idea that it is narrated in the Sahih of Imam Muslim, and we'll suffice ourselves with that. It's always generally narrated from this chain of narrators, from Ismail ibn Raja, who narrates from Aus ibn Dam'aj, who narrates from Abu Mas'ud al-Badri, the companion, radiyallahu anhu. He said that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, "Ya ummul qawma aqra'uhum li kitabillah, فإن كانوا في القراءة سواء فأعلموهم بالسنة." The person who leads the people in prayer is the one who is most well read in the Quran or in the book of Allah. And if they're equal in qira'ah, in the reading, then the most knowledgeable of them about the sunnah. And if they are equal, فَإِن كَانُوا فِي السُّنَّةِ سَوَاءً, if they're equal with their knowledge of the sunnah, فَأَقْدَمُهُمْ هِجْرَةً, then the one who made hijrah first from amongst them. فَإِن كَانُوا فِي الْهِجْرَةِ سَوَاءً فَأَقْدَمُهُمْ سِلْمًا, and if they are equal in the time that they made hijrah, then the oldest one in Islam, the one who has been in Islam the longest. Then the Prophet ﷺ said, وَلَا يَؤُمَّنَّ الرَّجُلُ فِي سُلْطَانِهِ, and let not a man lead another man in his sultan, in his place of authority. وَلَا يَقْعُدْ فِي بَيْتِهِ عَلَى تَكْرِمَتِهِ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِهِ, and let him not sit in his place, in his house, or his special sitting place, the seat that is for him specifically in his house. Let him not sit in that seat except with his permission. Then Imam Muslim mentions the same hadith from another narration, from the narration of Shu'bah ibn al-Hajjaj, who narrates from, again, Ismail ibn Raja, on the authority of Aus ibn Dam'aj, on the authority of Abu Mas'ud al-Badri, radiyallahu anhu. He said that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said to us, and you're going to notice some change in the meaning or in the wording here in the hadith, Ya ummul qawma aqra'uhum li kitabillah, the one who leads the people in salat is the one who is most well read in the book of Allah. Wa aqdamuhum qira'atan, and he has the oldest recitation, or the one with the longest history. فَإِنْ كَانَتْ قِرَاءَتُهُمْ سَوَاءً فَلْيَؤُمَّهُمْ أَقْدَمُهُمْ هِجْرَةً, and if they were equal in their qira'ah, in their recitation, then the one who leads them is the the oldest in terms of hijrah, the one who had made hijrah first. فَإِنْ كَانُوا فِي الْهِجْرَةِ سَوَاءً, and if they are equal in the time when they made hijrah, فَلْيَؤُمَّهُمْ أَكْبَرُهُمْ سِنًّا, then the one who leads the salat should be the eldest in age, the oldest of them in age. The one who leads the salat in such a case is the oldest in age. وَلَا تَؤُمَّنَّ الرَّجُلَ فِي بَيْتِهِ وَلَا فِي سُلْطَانِهِ, and do not lead another man in prayer in his house, nor in his place of authority, in his sultan. وَلَا تَجْلِسْ عَلَى تَكْرِيمَتِهِ فِي بَيْتِهِ إِلَّا أَنْ يَأْذَنَ لَكَ, and do not sit in his special seat in his house except that he gives you permission to do that. And I mentioned to you that hadith was collected by possibly a great number of collectors of hadith, reaching in the beyond 100 sources for the hadith. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions basically that this hadith was collected by Muslim and not by al-Bukhari, because it did not conform to the standards of al-Bukhari in the collection of his Sahih. However, al-Bukhari did refer to it in one of his chapter titles, referred to part of the phrase or part of the wording of the hadith in what Ibn Hajar calls mawdi' al-ihtijaj, in the phase of using it as a proof, which according to Ibn Hajar's principle in understanding the ahadith that al-Bukhari uses in his chapter titles, means that al-Bukhari viewed this hadith as being authentic. However, not authentic enough or not strong enough in its authenticity to be considered one of the hadith he would use in his Sahih. He only used the most authentic of the Sahih that he knew of. However, al-Bukhari considered other ahadith to be as well authentic, but not as strong as those he used in his book. So Ibn Hajar derives from this principle that since al-Bukhari mentioned a phrase from this hadith that only comes by this chain in a chapter title, and he mentioned it in a way that shows al-Bukhari was using it as a proof to prove a fiqh point, then Ibn Hajar concludes this means al-Bukhari viewed this hadith as being authentic, even though he did not include it in his book Sahih al-Bukhari. Some of the phrases in the other sources that I mentioned include hijrah being mentioned first before knowledge of the sunnah, or before even knowledge of the Quran. And this seems to be a mistake from some of the narrators, as Ibn Hajar mentions in his book Ad-Diraya في تخريج الأحاديث الهداية. He says, وهذا مخالف للأحاديث الصحيحة. This goes against the authentically related hadith. In some of the phrases I'm going to mention to you now, as I mentioned, there are perhaps 100 sources for this hadith. I'm going to mention a few of the differences in the wordings that come in some of those source books. In one narration collected by al-Baghawi and al-Tabarani and others, أَحَقُّ الْقَوْمِ أَنْ يُؤَمَّهُمْ أَقْرَأُهُمْ, the most deserving of the people or of a tribe or a group of people is that, or the most deserving to lead them is the one who is أَقْرَأُهُمْ. Again, having the same meaning but a slightly different wording. And another wording which comes in the Mu'jam al-Kabir of al-Tabarani, وَلَا تَأُمَّ أَحَدًا فِي أَمْرَتِهِ, and do not lead anyone in salat in a place of his authority, using another word for the idea of sultan. Don't lead another person ever in a place of his authority. And in another narration collected by al-Tabarani and by al-Hakim in his Mustadrak, فَأَفْقَهُهُمْ فِقْهًا, in place of أَعْلَمُهُمْ بِالسُّنَّةِ, some of the narrations have the Prophet ﷺ saying, أَفْقَهُهُمْ فِقْهًا, the most knowledgeable of them in fiqh, or the most well understanding of them, or the one who knows the most about fiqh. And that basically means the same of أَعْلَمُهُمْ بِالسُّنَّةِ. أَعْلَمُهُمْ بِالسُّنَّةِ, the most knowledgeable of them about the sunnah, meaning the fiqh of the sunnah. So then this can be a case of narrating by meaning. In one narration, which also may be a case of narrating the hadith according to what the narrator understands to be its meaning, and it may not be correct, and this is where the scholars talk about the issue of narrating a hadith with its meaning but not using the exact phrase. The majority of the scholars allow that, with conditions. One condition is that there is no misunderstanding in the meaning of the hadith, which is then reflected in the way it's narrated with other than its wording. So this may be a case of that, where one of the narrators narrated this hadith and said, أَكْثَرُهُمْ قُرْآنًا, the one who knows the most Qur'an. Because we're going to look at the meaning. One of the most important fiqh aspects of this hadith is exactly what is the meaning of being well versed in the Qur'an. Does it mean the most memorization? Does it mean the best tajweed? Does it mean the one who is best in applying the rulings in the Qur'an? Does it mean the one who is most virtuous according to the Qur'an? What exactly is the meaning of the most well-read in the Qur'an? And we're going to see, especially in light of the fact that Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he is the one that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam chose to lead the salat in his absence. We have to give a lot of relevance to that hadith to see how are we going to understand the meaning of أَقْرَأُهُمْ لِكِتَابِ اللَّهِ, the most well-versed in the book of Allah. So some of the narrators narrate the hadith as mentioned by Al-Hakim in his Mustadrak, أَكْثَرُهُمْ قُرْآنًا. So they understood from the hadith that the most well-versed in the Qur'an means the one who has the most memorized. Not necessarily the most fiqh, not necessarily the most practice, but the one who has the most any parts of the Qur'an memorized, or the entire Qur'an memorized. And that's the meaning. So some of them narrated it with that meaning. And they changed the wording from أَقْرَأُهُمْ to أَكْثَرُهُمْ, the most well-read, to the one who knows the most in quantity. Furthermore, in the Al-Mu'jam al-Kabir, again of al-Tabarani, وَلَا تَأُمَّنَّ ذَا سُلْطَانٍ فِي سُلْطَانِهِ, and do not ever lead a person of authority in the place of his authority. And another narration collected by al-Tahawi in Sharh Mushkil al-Athar, he said, or the following wording is attributed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَلَا يَؤُمُّ أَمِيرٌ وَلَا يُؤَمُّ أَمِيرٌ فِي إِمَارَتِهِ وَلَا فِي أَهْلِهِ. And an amir, the person of imara, the person of leadership, a leader, is not to be led in the place of his leadership, nor in his house, or in his ahl, amongst his people, amongst his family. And that was collected by Al-Imam al-Tahawi in Sharh Mushkil al-Athar. Before we talk about the meaning of being the most well-versed in the Qur'an, let's present one topic before we go into that discussion, or two topics, and then we'll begin our discussion of the real understanding of the hadith. Firstly, what is the understanding of this hadith? Is it wajib to put people in authority, or to put people in front of us as the imams according to the order in this hadith? Is this wajib or recommended? That's the issue, and some of the scholars discussed it. Al-Aini, rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentioned that the very wording in this hadith shows that it is not for an obligation. And he said it's sighat al-ikhbar. It's a way of giving you information. A person is not, or the one who leads the people in prayer, he is the one who is most well versed in the Qur'an. As opposed to saying, pick the one who is an order. There's no order, rather it's information. As if this is the way it is. The one who leads the salat is the most well versed in the Qur'an. And it's less in strength than an order. An order would be, when it comes time to pick someone to lead the salat, then pick the one who knows the most Qur'an, or the one who is most well versed in the Qur'an. So based on this, this style of Arabic, that it's sighat al-ikhbar, giving you information but not ordering you, then Al-Aini and others have said that it is not an obligation, rather these are guidelines that are recommended for you to follow when you place leaders in front of you to lead the salat. And of course we're going to talk about when is it that you are to choose and use these guidelines, and when is it that it's already chosen and you do not go by these guidelines. And it's possible, as well as some of the other scholars have understood, and we're going to look at that in more detail as we go through this discussion, inshaAllah, that this was an obligation. And it's possible as well that there be not an order, but an information, a khabar. I don't want to say information, a khabar, informing you of the reality of something, and it's also an order. For example, there is no fusuq in Hajj. There's no fusuq and there's no rafath. There's to be no any bad actions of disobedience, and no jidal, and no argumentation in Hajj. Now, is that just information, that there's no jidal in Hajj? Or is there a prohibition meant here? There's a prohibition meant here. You are not to argue during Hajj. Right? So then there is the idea that you see in front of you of someone telling, or one of the texts of the book or the sunnah saying there is to be nothing like this, and the actual meaning is an order or a prohibition. So some of the scholars said the one who leads the salat is the most well versed in the Quran means that it's an order from the Sharia that you place in front of you the one who is the most well versed in the Quran. Others said no, it's possible that this kind of wording means a recommended thing or something for permissibility, and that is like the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, يَمْسَحُ الْمُقِيمُ يَوْمًا وَلَيْلًا. The resident wipes over his khufs one day and one night. Does that mean it is obligatory on the resident to wipe over his khufs for an entire day and an entire night? Or what does it mean? It's permissible for a resident to wipe over his khufs, his footwear, after making wudu and putting his feet in the footwear in a state of wudu. It's permissible. But here is the same kind of style of Arabic, right? That the traveler wipes over his shoes or his footwear for a day and a night. So we have some texts giving us this kind of information, like this is the way it is, and the resulting ruling is it's a recommended thing or it's permissible. And other texts come to tell us, like for example, there is no jidal in Hajj, and that is clearly a prohibition of argumentation during Hajj. We're going to look at the statements of the scholars and which one they chose as we go on through the discussion, insha'Allah ta'ala. The last issue, or the second issue we need to allude to before we get into the meat of the discussion is that the mention of the Quran first, before the Sunnah or before fiqh or before hijrah or before a person's age, is based on the idea that our deen definitely gives precedence to the book of Allah. As Ash-Shatibi mentioned in his book Al-Muwafaqat, يؤم الناس أقرأهم لكتاب الله وما ذاك إلا أنه أعلم بأحكام الله فالعالم بالقرآن عالم بجملة الشريعة. So we give precedence to the one who knows the Quran best, or the one who's most well versed in the Quran, and it is a kind of giving precedence to the Quran itself, as Al-Shatibi says here, and that's only due to the fact that he will be most knowledgeable about the rulings of Allah. And so the one who's knowledgeable about the Quran is in fact knowledgeable about all of the rulings of the Sharia. And of course that's upon the understanding of some of the scholars that we're going to discuss now, that the meaning of the hadith is the one who has the most fiqh and the most understanding of the Quran, not necessarily the one who has memorized the most with no understanding. So now let us look to the ways the ulama understood the meaning of the hadith. أقرأهم لكتاب الله. The first one to lead the salat is what? Is who? The one who is most well versed in the Quran, most well versed in the book of Allah. A group of scholars said that means أكثرهم قرآنا. It means the ones who know the most Quran, without looking to something else now, just the most Quran. Al-Qurtubi mentioned this, and he used as a proof what has come in some narrations, which I mentioned to you may be a narration by way of the meaning, which cannot possibly be used as a proof in this case, that يُؤُمُّهُمْ أَكْثَرُهُمْ قُرْآنًا. The one who leads the people is the one who knows the most Quran in quantity. And we gave a reference to the fact that that may be a narration by meaning. And then Al-Qurtubi mentioned after that, the one who is, after he knows the most Quran, if people are equal in knowing the quantity, then the one who is to lead is the one who is most precise in his recitation, and the one who has the most beautiful recitation. That's mentioned in his book Al-Mufhim, which is an explanation of Sahih Muslim. And this is the position as well of a number of scholars. It's the position of Ibn Rajab, a Hanbali scholar, and it is rooted in the Hanbali madhab, and it is a position held by Imam Ahmad in one narration, and Sufyan al-Thawri, and Ishaq ibn Rahuya, and the Hanafi scholars as well. And this was mentioned, or this position is mentioned and given credit, but not concluded with by Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar in Fath al-Bari as well. They basically go by what seems to be the apparent meaning of the hadith, without giving much consideration to the hadith of Abu Bakr being ordered to go and lead the salat, as we're going to look at now with the second group of scholars who gave precedence. They combined this hadith with the hadith of Abu Bakr being ordered to lead the salat in the absence of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there are many claims from early scholars in Islam that Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu and Umar and Ali, the three of the four khulafa, had never finished memorizing the entire Quran. And they said the only one who memorized the entire Quran was Uthman radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And this was mentioned by Ibn Qutaybah in his book Mushkil al-Quran, in a very convincing passage about the importance of having fiqh in the Quran and not having a lot of memorization without fiqh. So he talked about even the khulafa, the four khulafa, only one of them had completed the recitation or completed the memorization of the entire Quran, and that was Uthman. So this being the case, a group of scholars looked at this hadith in light of Abu Bakr being ordered to lead the salat in the absence of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with the presence of Uthman. And Uthman had memorized the entire Quran, and Abu Bakr had not, according to what seems to be correct historically. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam insisted on Abu Bakr leading the salat in his absence. And even when they tried to, Aisha radiallahu anha and others, they tried to intercede to have the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam requested from Umar or someone else, saying that Abu Bakr, when he leads the salat, he cries and his voice is so low that the people can't hear him. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam insisted that Abu Bakr lead the salat in his absence. So these scholars have combined these two hadith to say that the meaning of aqra here, most well read in the Quran, does not mean quantity wise, but rather it means fiqh, and the understanding the Quran and applying the Quran and having knowledge of the deen. And so they said the meaning of al-aqra is al-afqah, the one with the most fiqh, or the one with the most knowledge of the Quran. And this was mentioned by al-Qurtubi, and I mentioned to you that al-Qurtubi held the first position. And al-Qurtubi, not the scholar of tafsir, this is a different Qurtubi. His name is Abul Abbaas al-Qurtubi, who wrote the explanation of Sahih Muslim. He said this is a position held by Ashab al-Hadith, the scholars of Hadith. And they said, since in the Sahaba's time, the meaning of the word aqra meant afqah, because they used to refer to their fuqaha as qurra. They used to refer to the scholars of fiqh as qurra. Right? The people of qira'ah used to be known as the people of fiqh in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he was speaking, and according to this position, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was speaking using that terminology that was known to the Sahaba, that the one with the most qira'ah, or the one with the most aqra' an-nas, the one who's well versed in the Quran, is the one who knows its fiqh the most. And so that was who? Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. So al-Qurtubi mentions that this was based on the naming of a faqih as a qari. A person who is a faqih will be called a qari in the language of the Sahaba. And he says, if this is the case, what they're saying, then this seems to be what's true. So al-Qurtubi held the first position, however he allowed the second position to be understood, so long as it's established that that was truly the language the Prophet ﷺ was intending to use, a language understood by the Sahaba, that the one who's the qari is a faqih, the one who's a reader is a faqih, a person of fiqh. This position was held by a number of the early scholars more than the first position. For example, this was the position of Imam Malik, and this was the position of al-Shafi'i as well, and the position of al-Awza'i, and Ata ibn Abi Rabah, and Ibn Abd al-Barr later on, and Abu Thawr from the Shafi'i scholars, and later on the likes of the author of Badl al-Majhud, and al-Sindi, the one who wrote the explanations of the Sunan. And Ibn Hajar mentioned this position in Fath al-Bari. However, he did not conclude with it. Al-Aini also held this position. He was one of the more famous explainers of Sahih al-Bukhari around the time of Ibn Hajar. However, he was a Hanafi. He died in the year 855, 3 years after Ibn Hajar died. He basically refuted a doubt that might come to someone's mind about this position. Something you might say if you want to respond to this, the people who hold this position is, if you say that the phrase of the hadith again is what? يَأُمُّ الْقَوْمَ أَقْرَأُهُمْ لِكِتَابِ اللَّهِ. The one who leads the people is the one who is, as you understand it now, the one with the most fiqh and the most knowledge about the Book of Allah. Then, after that, the one who leads them, according to some of the narrations, is the one who's أعلمهم, the one who's most knowledgeable. This necessitates your understanding that there is repetition in the hadith. So this means that your understanding has to be wrong. So Al-Aini mentioned this and he said the response to that is the meaning of most knowledgeable in the first part of the hadith is most knowledgeable about the Quran. And then what comes second is أعلمكم or أعلمهم بالسنة. The one after the one who's most knowledgeable in the Quran is the one who's most knowledgeable of the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So then there's a clear distinction made between أعلمهم in the first part of the hadith. We're saying أفقههم means أعلمهم, and then the أعلمهم in the second part of the hadith, the most knowledgeable of the Sunnah. So it comes second. So Al-Aini responded with that response, and it seems to be a very clear and good response. Some of the scholars held another position. They said, أقرأهم, the most well-versed of them means the one who has the best tajweed and can produce the letters from their makharij, from the points of articulation, the best. And they know the most about the right places to stop in the ayat and the places where you should continue. So they said this is the meaning of being a qari, that you know about the actual method of recitation of the Quran. Not necessarily that you have a lot memorized or that you understand what you memorized, but here the position is what? That you understand how physically to produce the letters of the Quran and how to recite the Quran on your tongue. You have the best tajweed, you have the best recitation according to the rules of recitation, the rules of tajweed. This was a position held by Abu Yusuf, and it was also attributed to Al-Imam al-Shafi'i. Another position that some of the scholars held, like Al-Layth ibn Sa'ad, one of the early Imams, he said basically before this hadith, the hadith is as it is, the qira'ah is first, and he didn't explain what the qira'ah is, but he said before that is afdal. The best of the people comes before everything mentioned in the hadith. And he allowed the action of the Prophet ﷺ appointing Abu Bakr to be the first choice, is the best and most virtuous person, and then أقرأهم لكتاب الله. So he allowed the action of the Prophet ﷺ selecting Abu Bakr to be something added on to the meaning of the hadith and put first before what is mentioned first in the other hadith with the four things that you use as a criteria to select the Imam. So first and foremost, before what's mentioned in the hadith is, like Abu Bakr was, being the best and most virtuous, the most taqwa, or the best Muslim. And then after that, the one who is most well versed in the Quran. And that was held by Al-Layth. And some of the Shafi'i scholars have another position, and that is the one with the most taqwa comes first. And these are all basically responses to the idea that the Prophet ﷺ appointed Abu Bakr radiyallahu ta'ala anhu as the Imam in his absence. So they said this means either he's the most pious or the best and most virtuous, or that is the meaning of being the most, having the most qira'ah or the best qira'ah, that you have the most fiqh and the most understanding of what you have memorized. And lastly, we'll mention a very weak position that some of the scholars held, that the hadith of al-Qawm, the entire hadith we're talking about, the hadith of Abu Mas'ud al-Badri, is abrogated by the action of the Prophet ﷺ when he selected Abu Bakr as the Imam in his absence. So what would make people say that this abrogates, or this final action of the Prophet ﷺ abrogates his earlier statement? is because they could not see how Abu Bakr could be included in the hadith as aqra'uhum. Because they said clearly, Ubay ibn Ka'b was named by the Prophet ﷺ as being aqra'uhum. So since the very one who said that aqra'uhum is the one who leads the salat, and that had to be Ubay ibn Ka'b because he named him in a separate narration as being aqra'uhum. So they said there is a need for abrogation here. One of the texts, we have to throw them out. So which one is earlier and which one is later? The obviously choosing Abu Bakr to lead in his place was during his final illness, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he died from. And the other hadith is a hadith that has to be considered earlier than that. So they said that then, based on that, the hadith of Abu Mas'ud in its entirety is abrogated due to the action of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now I'm going to mention to you some of the statements of the scholars to back up the general idea I've shown you here, that the scholars have a number of different positions. I'm going to mention some specific statements of some of the scholars to give some more detail to the generality of what I've mentioned here. Al-Qurtubi, he mentions that Imam Malik held the position, as I mentioned to you, that the faqih, the person of fiqh, who understands the deen and has knowledge, should lead the salat in front of the qari, the one who is a reciter, but is not knowledgeable about fiqh. He said, لِأَنَّ الْحَاجَةَ إِلَى الْفِقْهِ أَكْثَرُ. Because just like you need both of them for the salat, you need fiqh and you need the recitation of the Quran. But which one do you need more? Which one is more relative to the actions of the salat? Is it simply the recitation of the Quran? That's only in the standing. The fiqh that a person needs to lead the salat is a lot of fiqh. Some things may come up, and he does not know how to handle the situation if he's just a qari, if he's just a reciter, and he's not also a faqih who knows the rulings about the salat. So he says, هو أعرف بما ينوبه من الحوادث في الصلاة. So what might happen in the salat, in the affairs that might happen throughout the salat, the one who has fiqh, he's the one who's able to handle them, and so then he's the one who's most worthy of leading the salat. That was mentioned by al-Qurtubi and attributed to al-Imam Malik. And we're going to discuss some more details about this, the issue of أعلمهم بالقراءة. But let's finish the phrase of the hadith to get a general understanding about the wordings found in the rest of the hadith. أعلمهم بالسنة, the most knowledgeable of them in sunnah, as al-Khattabi explains, is fiqh, is the meaning of, is what comes in the other narrations of fiqh, أفقههم فقها, the most knowledgeable of them in fiqh, and knowing the rulings of the salat and what the Prophet ﷺ legislated for us between the actions of the salat and what he has ordered with. And then after that is the one who has made hijrah first. The one who has made hijrah first. And al-Khattabi mentions the idea here that some of the ulama consider hijrah to be cancelled. There is no such thing as hijrah anymore. That hijrah was from Mecca to al-Madinah, and now hijrah is over with the hijrah that the Sahaba made to the Prophet ﷺ. So then this virtue remained for those muhajirin in the time of the Sahaba, and then it's something inherited by the children of the muhajirin. This is what he mentioned. That the meaning of first in hijrah now means that you cannot make hijrah today, according to the opinion of some scholars. Hijrah is over. La hijrata ba'da al-fath. Right? There is no hijrah after the conquering of Mecca, as a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, and it has another understanding that we're going to talk about. But since there is no more hijrah, then the only thing that can be referred to nowadays by this hadith are the children of the muhajirin. So whoever has lineage linking him to the muhajirin, then he is to be given precedence, thirdly, in the affairs mentioned in this hadith, over those who do not have lineage to the muhajirin, those who made hijrah with the Prophet ﷺ. An-Nawawi, he mentions this, and he mentions there's another position for those who affirm the hijrah, that it's ongoing, and hijrah is in fact ongoing, due to the explicit statement of the Prophet ﷺ that hijrah will go on until the sun rises from the west. So hijrah is available. However, people do not make hijrah to the Prophet ﷺ directly. There is no specific hijrah to Medina now, or hijrah to the grave of the Prophet ﷺ. Rather, the hijrah now is towards good deeds, towards obedience of Allah, from the lands of disobedience to the lands of obedience, from the lands of kufr and disbelief to the lands of belief and tawheed and sunnah. So hijrah goes on. And the meaning of there's no hijrah after the conquering of Mecca is what? There's no hijrah from Mecca anymore. The first hijrah was understood to be the hijrah from Mecca to Medina. Now there's no hijrah after the conquering of Mecca. Why? Because Mecca is the land of the Muslims now, and you don't make hijrah from the land of the Muslims. So there's no hijrah from Mecca to Medina after the conquering of Mecca, and that seems to be the correct position on that hadith. So now they need, or they have a more easier understanding of the hadith, the one who made hijrah first, meaning either the hijrah in the time of the Sahaba or the hijrah in this time. If you have left the land of disbelief or the land of sins or the land of shirk and you have gone to the land of tawheed and the land of the Muslims. So if you, according to the hadith, are similar to someone who has the same amount of Quran, or this, according to the understandings we mentioned, has the same fiqh and the same understanding of the Quran, or the same practice of the Quran, and also the same amount of knowledge of the Sunnah, then it goes to whichever of you have made hijrah first. And in Nawawi he mentioned this, as I discussed. And then after that, the fourth affair in the hadith is أقدمهم أو أكبرهم سنا وأقدمهم سنا, the oldest of them in age. So after that, if you are equal in hijrah and you both made hijrah at the same time, then the one who leads the salat is the one who is oldest in age. And the other narration which mentions a silm, the oldest in Islam, that explains this narration, that the meaning is the oldest, not in age, but the oldest in Islam. So if someone has been a Muslim for 20 years, he leads the salat over someone who has been a Muslim for 15 years. And that's even if the Muslim for 20 years is only 30 years old, but the one who's been a Muslim for 15 years is 60. So the one who leads the salat is the younger one because he's been in Islam longer. His age in Islam, he's older than his older brother in reality in years. He's older in terms of the number of years he has been in Islam. And this was mentioned by Abbaas al-Qurtubi, and he said this is what is to be understood from someone being older than another person. It is that he has been in Islam longer. I'm going to read to you now some words of Imam al-Shafi'i and some words of al-Qurtubi as well, to give you some more details about the order of these four things. Al-Shafi'i said in his book he said, if the people in a place have no leader, they have no governor in the place where they are, and they're not in the house of any one of them, they're not in a place of authority, rather they're out together in a place where not one of them has more authority than the others, then they are to put in front of them for the salat aqra'uhum, the one who knows the most Quran and the one with the most fiqh. He says them together, aqra'uhum wa afqahuhum wa asannuhum, and also the elder, the one with the most knowledge, the one with the most recitation, the most knowledge, and the oldest of them. If that is not found in one of them, then who goes first? The one who is specifically the most knowledgeable, the one who has the most fiqh. Even if there are others who know more Quran than him. And that is good, that he leads the salat even in the presence, he said, fahasan. And he leads the salat even if he doesn't know a lot of the Quran, but he has a strong understanding of the deen and good fiqh more than the people with him. Even if those with him know more Quran than him, but he knows more fiqh. He has more understanding in the religion. So he has more right to lead the salat. And if they also put the one in front of him, in the front of them, the one who knew the most Quran, if he knew enough fiqh to know how to lead the salat properly and to know about the different situations that might arise, then that's also acceptable. Either case is acceptable. According to who? Imam al-Shafi'i. And we're highlighting the words of Imam al-Shafi'i because of his early status as one of the senior scholars, or one of the early scholars of Islam, one of the imams of the well-known madhahib, and he has spoken about this issue in some detail, and he's discussed it in a practical way. So we need to give his words a lot of weight here. And he said specifically, the reason why the Prophet ﷺ said aqra'uhum is to lead the salat, the most well read from the Quran, is that in the time of the Sahaba, there were Sahabas who were accepting Islam and they were very old in age. They were very old in age. And according to the Arab tribes, the Arab customs, he is to be given leadership and he is to be put in front of the people as the leader because he is the elder. And so the Prophet ﷺ, when he legislated this, he said, أَقْرَأُهُمْ, and he put the age factor after the ones who learned the qira'ah of the Quran and the fiqh in the deen. And that was because, as mentioned by Shafi'i here, كَانُوا يُسْلِمُونَ كِبَارًا. And so they would also, as they accepted Islam, they would get fiqh in the religion before they would begin to read the Quran. They would start learning about Islam before they could actually sit and read the Quran. They would learn the rulings that are related to their lives, and those things they came before they began to read. So then the one who began to read was someone who had already gotten fiqh in the religion, and it was understood that once he became a reader and began to memorize the Quran, he had already learned much of the fiqh that is required to be an imam, or required in the deen in general. So then, in such a case, he would be the most well-read, and at the same time, the one with the most fiqh. And there wouldn't be anyone that's most well-read except he already has more fiqh than the rest of the people. Because they were all, as the Shafi'i mentions, and he died in the year 204, so he's talking about a time that he was very close to himself. They used to, when they accepted Islam, learn fiqh in the religion, begin to learn the rulings of what is required from them, and then they would begin to learn to read and begin to memorize the Quran after that. So then this shows that any time a person became a qari, that he had already learned a sufficient amount of fiqh. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ mentioned fiqh here, or mentioned the qira'ah, recitation here. What's included in the understanding is fiqh. This is how a Shafi'i comes to his determination that fiqh comes before the amount that you have memorized. Naam. And Al-Khattabi, we'll move on to the words of Al-Khattabi that are important here. Al-Khattabi was one of the first people to give an explanation to the book Sahih al-Bukhari. He died in the year 388, so he's from the early Imams of Hadith. He said that this order, the book, knowledge of the Sunnah, knowledge or Hijrah, the one who made Hijrah first, and then age, this order, putting these four affairs in this order, knowledge of the book, knowledge of the Sunnah, Hijrah, and then age, this is the order that is correct according to the narrations of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he mentioned some words that were similar to what Ash-Shafi'i said about the custom of the people and how they would accept Islam, some of them being old, some of them being young, and how they would begin to learn fiqh before they began to read. Now, there is another opinion here that the hadith of Abu Mas'ud al-Badri is referring specifically to the khilafah, that the one who leads the people, not in the salat, but as their amir, as their khalifa. And he mentioned this in his explanation of Sahih Muslim. He said some of the ulama said that the Prophet ﷺ ordered the imams with this order, meaning that who is to be the imam, with this order, because it was the khilafah of the Prophet ﷺ. So then the imam of the people, he's the imam of the people in the dunya and in the hereafter. So he needs to be most knowledgeable of the book and most knowledgeable of the sunnah. And he is the one who will be closest to him in status and similar to him in his level in the society. So he needs to be knowledgeable of those things. This was mentioned by, as I mentioned to you, al-Qurtubi. And so he said that the meaning of the hadith in general is not related to specifically the salat, but it refers to specifically the khilafah, the larger imamah, or being the imam of the Muslims, the leader of the entire body of Muslims. And that is a position that was rare and not held by other than al-Qurtubi, to the best of my knowledge. Malik mentioned, as mentioned by Ibn Abdul Barr, rahimahullah, in the book Tamheed. And Ibn Abdul Barr is one of the earlier scholars as well, who was very strong and a lot of fiqh in his books, specifically the book Tamheed, which is an explanation of the Muwatta of Imam Malik. He was a Maliki scholar. very strong in his arguments. He mentions some narrations here from Imam Malik. He said that just like a Shafi'i, if the people select the one who is most knowledgeable to lead them, then this is Hasan, this is good. And age has a factor as well. But if it said, أكثرهم قرآنا, what if it said, Imam Malik said that the meaning of the hadith is the one who knows the most Qur'an. Imam Malik said no. The meaning of the hadith is not the one who knows the most Qur'an. As we mentioned to you, that wasn't his position. He said specifically, there can be people who memorize the Qur'an, but there's no good in them. And of course, Imam Malik can be referring to here the people of bid'ah, the people of innovation, or people who are disobedient, they don't act according to the Qur'an. And we live in a time where we should heed these words more closely, because we live in a time where we see in front of us people who memorize the entire Qur'an, but they are openly disobedient. Or people who memorize the entire Qur'an, but they are on a severe form of deviation in their aqeedah perhaps. So Imam Malik mentioned, when he was asked about shouldn't the person who knows the most Qur'an lead the people, he said no, because it can be the case that a person who knows the most Qur'an is a person who has no goodness in them. And Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, he said, the person who leads the salat is the one who knows the most Qur'an, and the most knowledgeable in the Sunnah. And if there's someone equal to him and knows the same amount of Qur'an and Sunnah, then the one who leads the salat is the one who is eldest, the one who is older. And if they're equal in age as well, in qira'ah and fiqh and age, then the one who is most pious, awra'uhum, the one with the most wara'. That's the statement of Abu Hanifa. Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani, as well one of the students of Abu Hanifa, and others have said, similar to what Ash-Shafi'i said. When Ash-Shafi'i said that the people's habits, or in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the people were accepting Islam, and they were learning fiqh right away, and then they would learn recitation to read and to recite after that. He went a step further than Ash-Shafi'i and said that means that in today's society this does not apply. But this was something to be applied to the time of the Prophet ﷺ only. So nowadays, you find that the people who have reached the level of reading, sometimes they're small children who don't know anything about Islam, but they can read the whole Qur'an. Sometimes they are people of innovation who know nothing about the correct aqeedah, or they deviated from the correct aqeedah, and therefore they cannot be placed in positions of leadership. As he said, أما اليوم فيتعلمون القرآن وهم صبيان لا فقه لهم. As for today, you find people learning the entire Qur'an, but they're children and they have no fiqh. So he said this does not apply to our time. Rather, this is something specific to the time of the companions, because when they began to learn to read and to memorize the Qur'an, it was after they had learned fiqh. It was after they had learned about the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and the rulings related to the salah. Imam Ahmad, rahimahullah ta'ala, said, or Al-Athram said to him, two people, one of them is better than the other, better in the deen, but the other one has more Qur'an. One of them is better in the deen, pay attention, because you see this now in today's society. One of them being a better Muslim, either closer to the Sunnah, more obedient, but the other one being less in status, but he knows more Qur'an. So what did Imam Ahmad say? Imam Ahmad said, holding to the apparent meaning of the hadith of Abu Mas'ud is, Ya al-Qawm aqra'uhum. Don't you see that Salim, the Mawla, the freed slave of Abi Hudhayfa, he used to be from the best of the Sahaba, and Umar was there, and Abu Salama ibn Abdul Asad, and he used to lead them in Salat because he memorized the most Qur'an. As we mentioned to you, the beginning of the lecture, Imam Ahmad held the position that the meaning of Aqra'uhum li kitabillah was just that, who knows the most of the Qur'an in quantity-wise. So then, Al-Athram debates Imam Ahmad here, and he says, But the Prophet ﷺ said, tell Abu Bakr to go lead the salat and let him lead the people. Isn't this in opposition to the hadith of Abu Mas'ud al-Badri, that the Prophet ﷺ said that the one who leads the people is the one with the most qira'ah? And Imam Ahmad's escape from this debate was, he said, no, because his statement to Abu Bakr specifically was an indication that he's going to be the Khalifa after him, and did not fall under the general idea of picking an Imam for the Salat. But this choosing Abu Bakr to lead him in his absence was an indication that Abu Bakr was most deserving of the Khilafah, not necessarily falling under the ordinary idea of picking an Imam for the Salat. That was Imam Ahmad's way of explaining that incident. So what he intended by choosing Abu Bakr was the Khilafah, and not just an ordinary Imam for the Salat. Al-Malik and the Shafi'i, as I mentioned to you before, they gave an explanation to why the person should know the most fiqh, as was their position. That is because things happen in the Salat, أمر لا يقدر على مراعاة الصواب فيه إلا كامل الفقه. Something might happen in the Salat that a person is not able to handle it unless he is a person possessing complete fiqh in the deen, or a high level of fiqh in the religion. And due to that, that's why the Prophet ﷺ put Abu Bakr in charge, because he was afqa, or that's why Abu Bakr was made to lead the Salat in the absence of the Prophet ﷺ, because he was the one with the most fiqh. Now, specifically moving on now. So I mentioned the positions of the ulama. What seems to be most correct from all those positions is that the one who has the most fiqh is the one who leads the salat. He's the one being referred to as the one who is most well read in the Quran, the one who is most well read, well versed in its understanding, and he practices it, doesn't oppose it, so he's not a fasiq. So all of that can be understood from the phrase أَقْرَأُهُمْ لِكِتَابِ اللَّهِ, the most well versed in the Quran, the one who has learned the most of the Quran, practices it, understands it, and doesn't oppose its teachings. All of that can be understood, and that will allow us to understand why Abu Bakr was chosen to lead the salat in the absence of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, after understanding that, there's a very important condition for us choosing the most well-versed in the Quran. That is, so long as there is no appointed leadership already. And this is what many people fail to take into consideration. And they may go into a masjid that has an appointed imam that perhaps is non-Arab, and his recitation has some problems. Not that it takes it outside of the correct recitation, but it's not entirely beautiful. Or he doesn't know a lot of Quran. And so they'll come with maybe a person who either has a shaved face or a person who is on some innovation, and they'll say, this is a hafiz of the Quran. This is the one who has memorized the whole Quran. Clearly much more than you people. So he deserves to lead you in your masjid. He deserves to be your imam. And they may even insist that such a person lead the salat and hold to the beginning of the hadith of Abu Mas'ud al-Badri, which is, Ya al-Qawm aqra'uhum li kitabillah. Upon the understanding that the one intended is the one who knows the most Quran quantity-wise. So if they hold to that, we can say from a number of angles there are refutations of this understanding. The first one, which has preceded that's not the understanding of the hadith, just the most quantity-wise. Rather, fiqh, understanding, implementation, not contradicting it, all of that should be considered as well. Since the Prophet ﷺ selected Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu ta'ala, the best of the ummah, meaning in his understanding of the deen, and his application of the deen, in his piety, in his closeness to Allah, and his rank amongst the Muslims, he was the one who was chosen to lead the salat. So he is aqra'uhum. He's the one with the best qira'ah, meaning the best qira'ah and implementation and everything that goes with that. So we can refute them from that angle. Furthermore, we can refute them from the last part of the hadith. In the same hadith is what? And a person may not lead another person in his sultan, in his place of authority. So this means, if the imam of the dunya in qira'ah, he memorized all 7 qira'at or 10 qira'at, and all the different modes of recitation, and all the different slight differences inside of one there are some people like that, they can sit and read al-Fatiha in front of you for an hour. and explain to you the differences between each recitation. And see in here is the ra, it has tafkhim, and here the ra has tarqiq, and they'll go and explain to you the minute differences between just the different recitations of Surah Al-Fatiha alone. That's how much knowledge they have of the qira'ah of the Quran, of the recitation of the Quran. So someone who reaches this level, if he visits someone in his house, a new Muslim who knows 3 or 4 surahs, just enough to pray, then who leads the salah according to the hadith? The owner of the house, or the renter of the house, or the person whose apartment he's visiting. Why is that? Because the Prophet ﷺ said, let none of you lead another person in salah in a place of his authority. In one narration, fi sultanihi, in his place of authority, which we're going to see here includes a masjid as well, or in his house. In one narration, fi baytihi, in his house. So there you see what we were talking about the one who has the most right to lead the salat. That's when you are at the time of choosing someone, and there is no one in authority already that has been put there, or has an imam that has already been placed there, or the owner of a house who already owns the house. The time you choose is when you are out somewhere traveling, or you are in a new masjid and you just built it today. Now you need to decide who's going to be the imam. There's not an imam already set. Or any time when perhaps the community has lost their imam, he's moving to another city, and they've decided that they're going to pick a new imam. Then you use the factors mentioned in the first part of the hadith. However, when you come into a masjid, and you are coming to a masjid that has established leadership has already been appointed, or a musalla, or a university prayer room, or someone's apartment, or any place where there are people in charge of it. There are some people who have some administrative powers or some administrative duties there, and they have selected a leader for the salat already. Then it is not at all the implementation of this hadith for you to come and say, no, we have to pick the most well-read. Because it's very possible that they picked the most well-read at the time, and now there are people coming who know more Quran later, or visitors who come by and know more Quran than the residents of that area. So it's not for us to come and say, no, each and every salat we have to pick the most well-read. Rather, once an imam is in place in a masjid, or in a musalla, or anywhere, and once a person has rented his apartment, and it's his apartment, then he is the imam in his apartment, and the imam of the masjid is the imam of the masjid. And someone is not to step in front of him. Al-Hasan al-Basri, one of the tabi'un, he came to a masjid, and of course he was sought after from all over, an imam in hadith and in knowledge. So Al-Hasan al-Basri comes into a masjid one day, and they told him, تَقَدَّمْ يَا أَبَا سَعِيد, go Abu Sa'id and lead the salat. So he said, الْإِمَامُ أَحَقُّ بِالْإِمَامَةِ. He refused, and he said, the imam of this masjid, he's the one who should most rightly deserve to lead the salat. And that's what you see in places where people know the sunnah. You find that they might invite one of the ulama to the masjid, and they may offer that alim to lead the salat, but the alim would most likely say, no, the imam, whoever leads the salat normally, he's the one who should lead the salat. And if they really urged him, for example, it's one of the imams known for a great recitation or something, with his permission, with the imam's permission, he'll ask the visiting scholar to come and lead the salat. And likewise, places that don't have access to scholars, they have a student of knowledge visiting or something, you find them, they understand the sunnah, and there is no need to say, we now turn over our entire masjid to the student of knowledge, or we turn over our entire masjid to the visiting scholar, or the likes. Rather, the leadership of the masjid is already established, and the people who understand the sunnah, they understand that the imam of the masjid will go on leading the salat as he normally does, and this is something that the Prophet ﷺ established for us by prohibiting us from going in front of the person who has an authority in a place where he is. From the scholars who specifically, because the hadith here doesn't mention a masjid and an imam of a masjid, it says, do not precede a person in his place of authority. So we basically understand from that masjids and imams of masjids. So who are the scholars who have preceded us in this understanding? They are, I'll mention a number of them, Ibn Rajab, An-Nawawi, Ibn Taymiyyah, At-Tibi, and from our time, Ibn Uthaymin, rahimahullah ta'ala. I'd like to mention to you some very sharp words from Ibn al-Uthaymin rahimahullah ta'ala, which is part of a very important issue. That is, what happens when people apply this hadith wrongly, and they say, after coming to a masjid with a fixed imam, that no, we have more right to lead the salat because we know more Quran. And they refuse to pray behind the imam, and they force themselves on the people of the masjid, and force themselves into the position of leading the prayer. Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala, he says the imam who has been selected for that masjid, he is the imam for the salat, even if there are people amongst them who know more Quran than him. Due to the statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَلَا يَؤُمُّ الرَّجُلُ الرَّجُلَ فِي سُلْطَانِهِ, and a man is not to lead another man in salat in a place of his authority. Here's Ibn Uthaymeen saying, وَإِمَامُ الْمَسْجِدِ الرَّاتِبِ سُلْطَانٌ فِي مَسْجِدِهِ. An imam of a masjid that is fixed in place, he's the imam that has been selected for that place, he is the authority in his masjid. حَتَّى إِنَّ بَعْضَ الْعُلَمَاءِ يَقُولُ, so much so that even some of the scholars say, لو أن أحدا تقدم وصلى بجماعة المسجد بدون إذن الإمام فصلاتهم باطلة وعليهم أن يعيدوا. That's so much so that even if the people were to oppose this and put someone else in front of them without the permission of that imam, then their salat, according to some of the scholars, would be invalid, and they would have to repeat their salat. Why? لأن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم نهى عن هذه الإمامة, because the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم forbid this kind of leadership. And his prohibition necessitates that whoever would fall into the action that is prohibited, then the action would be invalid. Other scholars, at the head of them, and the earliest of them, Imam al-Shafi'i, he said as a point of benefit that what's correct in this issue, and this issue is of course an old issue, that if someone preceded the imam or the person of authority in his authority going against this hadith, then he is sinful for doing that. However, the salat of the people with their imam in that case would be acceptable, because from the beginning of the salat to the end of the salat, all of the actions are proper, all of the pillars are there. And the prohibition is something that's related to something before the salat, not within the salat itself. So then the prohibition here does not render the deed invalid for those who fall into the prohibited affair. And there are a number of other issues related to the hadith, and we'll select them carefully because we are very short on time. There is one hadith narrated that the one who leads the salat is أحسنهم وجها. The one who leads the salat is the one who has the most beautifulest face, or the finest face, the prettiest face. And this was mentioned by Al-Munawi and Fayd al-Qadir as being from the narration of, who is it, Amr ibn Sinan? Al-Husayn. Al-Husayn ibn Mubarak was a person, he narrated this hadith, one of the narrators of this hadith, and he was accused of lying and fabricating hadith. So this hadith is considered to be mawdu', fabricated hadith. Another issue, what about the imam who is appointed to be followed in a masjid but does not read the Quran properly, as is the case that we find today? Al-Shafi'i mentioned this issue, and he said in his book Al-Umm, لا يجوز لذي سلطان ولا صاحب منزل أن يؤم حتى يكون يحسن يقرأ ما يجزئه به ما تجزئه الصلاة وما تجزيه به الصلاة ما تجزئه به الصلاة فإن لم يكن يقرأ ما تجزئه به الصلاة لم يكن له أن يؤم. He said it's not permissible for a person of authority, or the owner of a house, or the renter of a house, the person in his place of residence, to lead until he is able to recite properly the book of Allah Azza wa Jal, that which will make his salat valid. There are some errors in the salat, in the recitation of Al-Fatiha, that would render the salat invalid. Some mistakes are considered lesser mistakes that do not invalidate or do not corrupt the meaning of the Fatiha. Other mistakes corrupt the meaning of the Fatiha and make the meaning kufr, or a meaning that is not befitting at all to be ascribed to Allah Azza wa Jal as His speech, and thus would nullify the salat and not be considered the reading of Al-Fatiha. specifically with the reading of al-Fatiha, since it is a pillar of the Salah. And if you have not read al-Fatiha, then there is no Salat for you, as in the authentic Hadith. Ibn Uthaymeen and others mentioned from these errors are a person's recitation saying, for example, Iyaki na'budu. You're referring to Allah Azza wa Jal with a feminine pronoun, saying Iyaki na'budu. Or Sirat alladhina an'amtu alayhim. The path of those people who I have favored. The reciter says that. Guide us to the path of those who I have favored. Sirat alladhina an'amtu alayhim. So it's just a difference between an'amta and an'amtu. Right? But in this case it corrupts the meaning and it renders the salah invalid. Because now it is a meaning of shirk. So the kind of recitation that renders the salah invalid and a person does not know the difference or what he's done wrong, then he is not to lead the salah. Even if he has been put in a position to lead the salah, he is required to not lead the salah in such a case, according to Imam al-Shafi'i here. And he says, if he led the salah in such a case, then the salah, his salah, and the salah of those behind him is fasida, it is invalid. Even if he was the sultan, even if he was the ruler or the leader or the one appointed to be followed, or the person in his house. Because why? He has not been able to read what is the very basic element of the salah, Surah Al-Fatiha, in a way that will allow his salah to be acceptable. Moving on to a fatwa or a question that was posed to Shaykh Abdul Aziz ibn Baz about the imam of a masjid who skips some letters, or he's not able to pronounce some letters because of a problem with his tongue, or perhaps a difficulty that he has in reciting those certain letters. And he said, إذا كانت القراءة للفاتحة سليمة ولم يخل بشيء منها على وجه يغير المعنى فلا حرج في إمامته. If he reads, and the letters that you're talking about are not the letters of al-Fatiha, and he reads al-Fatiha completely without any errors, and he does not change the meaning of anything in al-Fatiha, then there is no problem with his leadership in the salah. لأن قراءة ما زاد عليها ليست واجبة. Because everything beyond al-Fatiha now, if it became null and void, the basic elements of the salat are still there. Surah Al-Fatiha is a pillar of the salat, and the recitation after Al-Fatiha is optional, or it is something that is not a rukn, a basic element of the salat that is required for the validity of the salat. However, if he is other than this, meaning his impediment has led him to, he's not able to recite letters of the Fatiha in a way that, or he reads them in a way that this changes the meaning of Al-Fatiha, then the likes of him are not allowed to lead the salat. And he gives some examples here. For example, he might say Rabbil Alameen or Rabbal Alameen. He might say Alhamdulillahi Rabbal Alameen. So if he doesn't make Rabbi with a kasra, rather he puts a fatha on it. Alhamdulillahi Rabbal Alameen. Right? This is a mistake. This is an error in recitation. However, does it change the meaning? It doesn't change anything about the meaning. However, it's not the proper recitation. Or for example, he says Rabbul Alameen, Alhamdulillahi Rabbul Alameen. Either way, it's a mistake. However, it does not corrupt the meaning and nullify the salat because of a corrupt meaning. Or if he says Ar-Rahmanur Rahim, likewise, he's just changing the case in grammar. Ar-Rahmanur Rahim, and it is an error and it is a contradiction. But if he says, for example, as I mentioned to you, Iyaki na'bud, or Sirat alladhina an'amti alayhim, right, referring to Allah Azza wa Jal with a female pronoun, then these are things that nullify the salah. And what is legislated in all affairs of the deen is that a person teach his brother what he doesn't know, and he advise. The Muslim is the brother of the Muslim. He teaches him if he makes an error, and he learns if he is ignorant. And if, for example, he does something in the salat that changes the meaning, yaftah alayhi, he will openly correct him from the prayer row. He will raise his voice with the correct recitation. And if the case, Sheikh bin Baz he closes his fatwa saying, or no, this is actually a different fatwa, if the mistake of the Imam is in al-Fatiha and it changes the meaning, then it is obligatory on all of those in charge of that masjid who are above the Imam in authority that they must change that Imam. They must change that Imam so long as he errs in the recitation of al-Fatiha. What about what's a modern day thing of the Imam who is clean shaven or takes on traits of the women, becomes gay or becomes, how would you say it, feminine, clean shaven or feminine in his way, and becomes not at all respectable. And that was similar to the old case of someone being a mukhannath, someone who was a hermaphrodite. He would be in between male and female, and not only hermaphrodite with his physical aspect of it, but also the way his character is. He would be in between a man and a woman. So Az-Zuhri mentioned that we do not pray behind the mukhannath. We do not pray behind the person who is between male and female, hermaphrodite. And we would only do that if for some reason a fitna would befall us if we didn't pray behind him. The people might fight or something if we didn't pray behind him. Other than that, we would not pray behind such a person. And Bukhari mentioned this in his Sahih, as Ibn Hajar mentioned. And he said, if it's the case that such an Imam was in power and not praying behind him would cause him to take up arms against the people and make fitna in the land, then the people have to pray behind the Imam, even though they would not like that at all. And Abdul Razak was asked, in his Musannaf was asked about the Mukhannath, and he said, no, in no way would we should not pray behind them with no respect. He is not to be prayed behind, and he is not to be prayed behind. What about the Imam who smokes cigarettes? The Imam who smokes cigarettes. Sheikh Abdullah ibn Humayd gave a fatwa about the Imam who smokes cigarettes. And we see this, we don't really see this here, we see this in other places around the world. You find perhaps in Egypt an Imam who will smoke a cigarette after he leads the Salah. Not in the masjid, but he's known to smoke cigarettes, or he's known to do other things which are, unacceptable. So Sheikh Abdullah ibn Humayd said the smoker, it's not befitting that the people pray behind him, especially when they find someone who's better than him to lead the Salah. If they find no one better than him to lead the Salah, or if they have come and they found him praying and they didn't know, or they didn't know he was a smoker, then the Salah would be sahih. The Salah would be acceptable, insha'Allah ta'ala. As a number of the scholars have mentioned, the legislation of praying behind every type of leader, whether he be openly obedient or disobedient. And whoever prayed behind him should not be ordered to repeat his salah, due to the generality of his statement, Sallu khalfa man qala la ilaha illallah. Pray behind every person who says la ilaha illallah. And he closed by saying, Allahu a'lam. I mentioned to you already the issue of those who precede the Imam in his place of authority, and that Ibn Uthaymeen said that this is something that would nullify, according to some of the scholars, this would nullify his salat and their salat, and they would all have to repeat. And I mentioned to you that Ash-Shafi'i said that this would be impermissible, but however the salat would still be valid. What if, here's an issue, what if the owner of the house and a renter of the house, the same house or apartment, are together? Who is to lead the salat? The owner or the renter? The renter, says Abdul Malik. Anyone say the owner? The owner? Because he owns the place, right? His authority is stronger. Right, but okay, who has the right to live in the place? The renter only. Who has the right to change the place and the decoration and move the furniture? The renter. You assign no authority to the owner. Or the owner has no authority to do anything in the place once he has rented it to someone. He has given up all rights to changing or having any authority in the place that he is renting out. And we're talking about the actual apartment that is rented out, not the entire building or the grounds, but the apartment itself. So the renter has more right, and so therefore he's the one who leads the salat, as mentioned by An-Nawawi in his book Al-Majmu'. Another issue that was discussed by Ash-Shafi'i, what if the Imam of the masjid is in the masjid, and the governor of the whole entire area. So now we have two Imams, a bigger Imam and a local Imam. And the governor and the Imam of the masjid in a Muslim state. What do you think? The governor, he says. The ruler. The Imam of the masjid, Yarbo says. Here, Shafi'i mentions that since the leadership of the wali, if he's in a masjid that's under his authority, then he has more right to lead the salat. Because that's his authority. He has not given up his authority to this Imam. Rather, this Imam only acts under his authority. So he still holds the authority over that place, unlike the owner and the renter.
If the governor visits some person
in their house as well. Even the same case, and Shafi'i mentioned exactly that. Jazakallahu khairan. If a person is praying in his house and he has the governor of the whole city in his house, and the governor is to lead the salah. We're talking about the Muslim governor in a Muslim land. The Muslim governor is to lead the salat and has more priorities to lead the salat than a Muslim in his own house. Why? Because that house is within the sultan of the governor. It's not outside of his sultan. And the sultan, because this person is renting in his authority, in his place of authority, has not handed over the authority to that person in his house. Rather, he's still under the authority, even in his house, of the Muslim governor. What about the Imam of the masjid in the house of one of the people? The people of the house have more right? Because the Imam of the masjid, his governorship or his leadership is limited to the masjid and nowhere else. So then the person who, the renter of the house or the owner of the house, he is the one who leads the salat in such a case. What about travelers? Is there any relationship here to travelers and residents? Some people who are residents and some people who are travelers, then An-Nawawi says the residents have more right. Because when they lead the salat, what's going to happen? The salat will be led in its full entirety. All the raka'at will be prayed. Right? However, if the Imam leads the salat, what happens? Or if the traveler leads the salat as the Imam, the salat will be shortened, and then you'll find many people opposing the Imam by standing up to finish more salat. So it's better to have all of the people praying the same salat than some of the people standing up to finish the salat after the Imam has finished. And that's the fatwa of An-Nawawi. What about specifically when a fasiq, we mentioned this already, but just to close on this issue, inshallah, the fasiq, the disobedient person, with open disobedience, perhaps a shaved face, perhaps any long thobe on the ground, or perhaps smoking cigarettes, or a person on riba, a fornicator, a person who's known as an open fasiq. What if he is a memorizer of the Quran, and he is with another person in an area where there's no sultan, who knows less Quran than him, but his adl, he's obedient and upright in the religion? Then An-Nawawi says in such a case that the person, the adl person, the righteous person who's upright, even though he knows less Quran, is to lead the salat in front of the hafiz, who is a fasiq, and that is more preferred. However, if the fasiq led the salat, it would fulfill, and it would be acceptable, and it would not be rejected, but it would be disliked in that case. And that's the fatwa of who? An-Nawawi. And with that, we'll close, having covered some issues related to the hadith. And we do not have any time to allow questions. I would like to, but I apologize, being that the adhan should have already been called. With that, we'll close, asking Allah Azza wa Jal by His names and attributes to grant us success in following His Sharia and sending the salat and the salam on His Prophet and final messenger, Muhammad ibn Abdullah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een.